Welcome, my friends of the interwebs. This will be my latest installment of my real life series videos. It's been a long time since I've sat in this preacher bench telling you about my real life, but I was getting sick and tired of everybody wanting to know why I'm not doing that anymore, and so that's what I'm doing. If you guys want to see me, here I am. Alright, I'm not sure what number this is. I think it's 16. Not positive about that, but I'll label it whatever number this real life series is, or this episode is. I left you off with a little pinhead action. I'm going to continue with that. Now, I sold my timber, my large tract of timber. I sold that by the boundary, which means that I basically took a one flat price for the timber in that area, in that boundary. But I had another piece of property that I wanted to sell the timber on over in Levi Branch, which was about 50 acres more or less. And that just happened to be in the land of the pinheads. There are some good people that live in Levi Branch, so I almost hate to call it the land of the pinheads, but you know, everybody that lives in there understands where I'm coming from. So I had 50 acres in there. I didn't want to sell that by the boundary. I wanted to sell that on a percentage, which means that instead of taking a lump sum for the timber, I would take a percentage of what that timber brought from the sawmill. So, you know, whatever split, I don't even remember now what the agreement was. I want to say it was like a 60-40 split. I got 40%, and the logger got 60% of whatever the sawmill paid for that any particular load. So, to simplify things, if a load of timber was worth $1,000, I got $400, and my logger got $600. So that's the way I wanted to do that, as opposed to selling it at the boundary. One of the reasons, truthfully, that I wanted to do it like that was because my logger knew what a jackass pinhead was, and he knew that there was going to be just a lot of grief over him acting a fool, which turned out to be exactly what happened. Now, I'm the only person that I know personally in that whole area in southeast Kentucky that ever hires a surveyor to survey his property before he cuts his timber. Okay, I'm it. You're looking at the only guy that's probably ever done that in that neck of the woods. Pinhead would never do anything like that. He just cuts. So I hire a surveyor. Now, you know from a previous episode of my real life that the surveyor that I hired was, you know, and truthfully, just he was an idiot. You know, he was a lazy bastard. He had done kind of a drive-by assessment of what the property was for a man named Slusher, who needed a deed description, not really even a survey, but a deed description, in order to auction it off, which is how Pinhead bought that property, by the way. Even though it's in Pinhead's daddy's name, we all know the truth. You all know whose property it is. It's that check-drawing fool. So, anyway, long story short, this surveyor, he was an idiot. So, like I said before, I had to give Pinhead the benefit of the doubt, because obviously my surveyor was turning out to be kind of a jerk, or kind of well, just a lazy bit. I don't know how to put it, other than the fact that the surveyor that I hired to survey that piece of property had done a survey for the man who owned Pinhead's property previous to him, did a half-assed job there, and as opposed to doing it right, just went off of his half-assed job that he did for the Slushers. So, you know, and like I said, nobody ever gets their stuff surveyed around there anyway, so I'm sure that surveyor that I hired just assumed that, you know, this would just be no big deal anyway, nobody would argue, and, you know, he would just get paid, and I paid him very well, and his little freaking troll that works for him too. But anyway, not to confuse everybody, but I mean, I was trying to put my best foot forward. I mean, I've always said I didn't want anything that didn't belong to me, and but I did want what did belong to me. So I mean, I was trying to at least figure out what was mine. Anyway, forever Pinhead was saying, "Oh, I think, you know, your surveyor screwed up. I think I own up to here. I think I own up to there." You know, Pinhead didn't know any more than anybody else. All I knew is that I actually had a survey to go off of. So he knew I was going to have some loggers coming in there. So he calls me one day. Pinhead calls me one day. And this is what I was trying to get along with him. I always try to get along with somebody until they screw me. Once they screw me, I do shit like make videos about them. You know, I don't care. But until they screw me, I try to get along with them. So Pinhead calls me one day, And he says, hey, I really do think your surveyor screwed up. I'm not trying to be an ass here, but I really think your surveyor screwed up. I would like to have a surveyor come out and meet us. Would you go 50-50 on that? Now, listen, I'd already paid a shitload of money to my surveyor to get that survey. But here's how much I was willing to bend over backwards for that little prick. I said to Pinhead, I said, listen, you bring a surveyor out to your surveyor, whoever you call, I don't really give a rat's ass. I'll go 50-50 on a new survey if that's what you want to do. If that's what will make you happy, that's what we'll do. Okay, so maybe this is painting a little bit of a picture why I'm so pissed off at Pinhead. So Pinhead said, okay, I got a guy coming over. He'd already set this up anyway. I got a guy coming over tomorrow at noon. Can you meet me at my house and meet the surveyor? And I said, yeah. And absolutely. So I go over to Pinhead's the next day at noon, and sure enough, the surveyor showed up, and I'd never met this guy before in my life. Seemingly qualified surveyor. He comes up on Pinhead's porch, and it's the three of us. Me, the new surveyor, and Pinhead. Okay? I'm on this side. New surveyor's here, Pinhead's on the other side. The new surveyor's got my deed, he's got Pinhead's deed, and he's got my surveyor's, the original surveyor that I had surveyed that property, has the map out. So he's looking at it, he's got his calculator, and he's punching numbers, and he's figuring this and figuring that, and calculating distances, and doing what surveyors do. And all of a sudden he says, he looks at Pinhead, he goes, I think you're right. He said, I think the surveyor that did the survey, and he was talking about the guy that did my first survey, he said, I think he screwed this up. And Pinhead had this huge smile on his face, like, he was justified in justified in all of his freaking stupidity. For once in his life, he could justify his ignorance. So, all of a sudden, though, the surveyor threw some hot water on him. He said, I believe that he's given you, and when he says he's talking about the original surveyor, he said, I believe he's given you, he's looking at Pinhead, about 4 acres of Mr. Hunter's property. So Pinhead, who set this whole freaking thing up, stands up, grabs his wallet, says, let me try to get this right, because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to screw Pinhead on this. He said, I believe Mr. Hunter and I can work this out on our own. Pulls a $100 bill out and hands it to the surveyor. And I didn't even know what to say at that point. The surveyor gets up and said, well, okay. And starts heading over to his truck. Pinhead grabs his deed and walks into his house. He didn't say anything to me. I run over to catch up with the surveyor, and I said, hey, listen, I said, can I have your card? Do you have a card? Can I have your card? I said, I got some more surveying that needs to be done. And here's the thing that impressed me about this guy. He was honest. See, here's the thing about surveyors. When a lot of times, and I don't know that this is indicative to Southeast Kentucky or not, maybe it is, but a lot of times the guy who calls the surveyor and the guy that the surveyor thinks is paying him usually gets things his way, if you know what I mean. Especially in a land where most of the surveys are from the Large Rock to the Hickory Flat to the creek to the whatever. So I knew that this dude was totally honest, which I dug about him. So I'm like, listen, I said, can I get your card? Because I always go back to the fact that I don't want anything that does not belong to me, but I want what does belong to me. You hearing me, Pinhead? Because I know you're fucking watching this. I'm sorry. Anyway, so he gives me his card, and we will, me and the surveyor will have a business relationship on further different projects. So anyway, I go back to up on Pinhead's porch. I'm waiting for Pinhead to come out, and he comes out. And he just was brooding, I don't know what to, blah blah blah, and then he starts bad mouthing the original surveyor that I had, and hell, I should have been the one bad mouthing the original surveyor I had. He was giving Pinhead my property. So I said to Pinhead, I said, listen, I said, why don't we just use my survey? Which, by the way, obviously was, and he pointed, the surveyor that Pinhead had called showed us exactly how he came to the conclusions that he came to. And once he did that, it was as clear as day, and Pinhead knows that. And so I said to Pinhead, I said, listen, I said, why don't, we just use my original survey for my timber so I can cut the timber. We'll worry about that 4 acres later. Let me just start cutting timber. And he said, well, that'll be fine. Okay, well, why wouldn't it be fine to him, So I get my loggers to show up, and to some expense, because there was some of you know who the West family is, or at least me talking about the West family. They owned the best piece of property at the head of the holler that would work for us for a landing. A landing is where you skid or drag your trees down to and get them set up and ready to load onto your trucks, so the trucks can then take the loads to the sawmill. So we had to work an agreement with the West family to allow us to use that flat. Because the thing about the Levi Branch property, for me, it's pretty straight up and down stuff. I mean, there wasn't a lot of flat spots where you could have set up a landing. So we had some initial expense. We had to bring in some gravel. There were some things that we needed to do, some dozer work. And originally, Pinhead, you could tell he was bothered. And for whatever reason, Pinhead just couldn't get it in his head. I don't know. I think at that point he was taking a lot of pills. He was taking a lot of pills. He was under a lot of stress. He knew I was in the right. He knew that he couldn't take me to court over it because he'd get stomped on. Like, he's seen what I did to Fritos people. When I'm in the right, I don't play the games. So, he knew that. I think he was really bothered by the whole thing. Plus, I think he was also bothered by the fact that he knew that literally bought something that the original surveyor that did that 50 acres did the Slusher survey, which is what he bought that property at. He knew he got screwed from Jump Street. Now, having said that, yeah, it's hard to feel sorry for a guy that used dope money to buy property. And here's a guy who is drawing an SSI check for a bogus disability off my tax dollars. Hard for me to really wrap my head around the concept of feeling sorry for Pinhead. Sorry. It just is. So, anyway, Pinhead was he was mind fucked on this. He really was. He was mind screwed. And he was popping a lot more pills. And depending on what pills he was popping, or the time frame, or how soon it had been since he'd taken a pill, or if he needed a pill, a lot of that reflected on what kind of mood he had, or had an impact on his mood. So anyway, so Pinhead would come up there and he'd do a little grumbling, but for the most part, he knew he couldn't stop me. So one day he comes up and he says to my logger, he said, "Look, we're going to have to go over these property lines." And my logger said, "Well, I've got a survey, and it's been flagged. The line's been flagged. Where's the problem?" Well, I don't know that he flagged the line properly. So we're back to him arguing about the freaking line. Now, understand this. The line that was flagged, was the line of my original survey, which we know now gave him 4 acres. So there was a 4-acre buffer there, and he's still bitching about where the flags were at. So anyway, so that kind of went on. It took him probably 3 or 4 days to get the landing set up right. It had been raining a little bit, and they had to contend with some mud, and they built in some initial logging roads. But during that 3 or 4 days, Pinhead, blah, 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 blah. So I said to my logger, I said, "Listen, just cut the timber. Don't worry about that fool. If he has an issue, let him hire a surveyor to do a survey." I already watched him run off a surveyor that he had called, and I can't imagine that he thought he was going to have any more luck with the next one, or he'd have brought another one in. So, look, I'm going to leave this here, and I'll come back for another part, because it does get much more interesting with Pinhead and some of the stupidity that comes flying. And I know some of you guys want to know how he's got a camcorder. That'll be coming up in future videos. And listen, for those of you family members of Pinhead, I'm glad you're starting to watch this. I want to say that at least you're going to get the real side of the story, other than the side that comes out of that idiot, relative of yours. For those of you who live in Levi Branch that send me messages that are new subscribers and friends of mine, you're welcome to come watch. I love it that you guys are. And I know you're not hearing anything you didn't already know before, but I know that it tickles you to hear it. Because, by the way, everybody that doesn't know, not only does Pinhead claim a bunch of my property, he claims just about everybody's property in Levi Branch. So a lot of Pinhead's neighbors, they're actually really big fans of this series. Anyway, listen, I will come back, and I don't know when I'm going to do the next one, but sometime in the future. So anyway, take care.